The program introduced me to all these different places, and then I realized that these resources were available to me. They were out there. For instance, the libraries in most of these institutes are actually open libraries that you could walk into any day of the week and get resources and learn the language, read the literature. And I just think it's really sad that like students aren't made aware of this sooner, because I feel like if more people knew about this stuff as students, they would definitely like take it on board and use it to develop their skills as like students, and they could do way better in their languages and hopefully pick them up even more later on in life as well.
Hello, and you're very welcome to this special edition Freiraum podcast as a part of the Pan-European Hybrid Festival, which hopes to discuss the state of freedom and the state of arts today. Remember, this festival runs from October 30th to November 1st and takes place both online and in person. So if you're looking for any events in your local area, why not search freiraumfestival.eu to see what's going on. My name is Daniel McFarlane and I'll be your host today. I work for the Trinity Access Programme, an organisation that hopes to widen participation for underrepresented groups at third level. We worked with over 60 students from both the inner city and the suburban areas to try and address cultural inequalities within Ireland today. Over the course of their school year, students were able to spend one day in each European Institute of Culture. Our project partners included the Alliance Française, the Goethe-Institut Irland, the Istituto di Cultura Italiano, and the Institute Cervantes. On our final day together, students were also invited to the European Commission Dublin to see the administrative and political side of life in Europe today. Over the course of the day, students were able to get a tour of the Institute, sample some of the traditional food of the host country, and also see how the power of language was able to connect and also celebrate the differences in Europe. For our Freiraum programme, we were also partnered with Salzburg Nancy, and we were able to run a Freiraum Theatre summer school with the Théâtre National de Salzburg. Students worked on an intense 4-day workshop with visiting actors from the Fallrichter play I Am Europe. This then resulted in a performance where students discussed their identity, their freedoms, and also the state of freedom and identity in Europe. We got a chance to sit down with two student participants, Ifanaya and Aisling, and discuss how they've been spending the pandemic and how the idea of youth and adolescent freedom has changed, not just before the Freiraum programme, but also during the pandemic of COVID-19.
Hello, my name is Ifanaya Chukwueze and I attend Virtual College Crumlin, and I've participated in Freiraum initiatives over the past 2 years, and I'd just like to share the experiences and the lessons I've learned from my experience.
Hi, my name is Aisling. I'm a student in 6th year in Public School of Solja in Palmerstown. Yeah, I'm also just going to be talking about some experiences and the lessons that I learned.
Cool, perfect. All right, so you're very welcome. But first things first, what I really want to get to the point on, Freiraum's a bit of a funny name in an Irish school. Would you guys agree?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. What was your first experience with the word or the title?
So I have always wanted to study abroad. So the idea of going to different language institutes really appealed to me. So that's why I applied for Freiraum.
Yeah, my school is really good about it. They said, I think this is something that would be really good for you as a student.
So what I'd love to ask you, Aisling, is what was your idea of freedom before starting Freiraum?
I think my idea of freedom before Freiraum, I didn't give it too much thought. I kind of took the freedoms I have a little bit for granted. And then when we did the Freiraum program and I started to see what kind of life was like for people in other countries and I saw different cultures, it just really made me appreciate freedom a whole lot more. So just one thing that kind of stuck with me from the Freiraum program was to me now, freedom means just living with no restrictions. Obviously we do have some restrictions laws and stuff, but living without restrictions on a personal level. So I think freedom for me in my life would be me having the freedom to go travel to Italy and go and study there and like learn there and experience their culture. And then I could go and I could study in Germany, or I could go and study in Sweden, or I could study anywhere like in Europe, and I could just like, that's what freedom is to me now.
I suppose the whole idea of freedom that both you guys both spoke of beforehand when starting Freiraum, an awful lot of the time it's geographical freedom, so literally the ability to get up and walk away, or and things like that. That that idea and that practice kind of stopped short when the COVID-19 pandemic took hold of Ireland. And it's been, I suppose, I know Freiraum's been great for challenging our own ideas on how we can redefine freedom or express freedom, but the pandemic literally took some of those core ideas and shook it up a little bit. Maybe, Aisling, if you want to describe how the pandemic started for a student in Ireland, how did it kind of start for you in Palmerstown?
Well, it started for me. I actually remember it so clearly. It was just a random Thursday, and we got told by a text sent home to our parents that we would have to come home from school. For obviously the school would be closing to COVID because of COVID. So my dad called me and was like, "You need to come home." And I thought something like had happened because none of our teachers had mentioned anything about like us having to go home. So I was like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And he was like, "Oh, you're gonna have to come home. The school's closing because of COVID." So we asked our teachers and stuff, was it true? And they were like, "Yeah." So basically, we spent the last class gone to our lockers and clearing out all our books that we would need. Well, obviously, none of us thought that we would be out of school for as long as we were. We thought it would literally be between 2 weeks and a month at most. So, like, I know there were a lot of people who left maybe some important copies or books in their locker because they could only carry so much home. So that was kind of a big problem. I know that a lot of students in my school faced trying to learn from home. And also, it was just very up in the air with regard to what the policy was for teaching. I know there were some schools that used Zoom calls, and then I know that there were some schools that kind of just gave like instructions on what to do and gave no Zoom calls. It was kind of like you just had to teach yourself from home. So basically, we just didn't have as many resources as like a private school would have had.
We were actually in class and found out at the same time as everyone else in the country that we're going on lockdown. And there was literally pandemonium that day in my school. Like everyone was like trying to ring home, get books taken home, stuff like that. Because like the schools were shutting down. Like that's never happened before. And luckily I was able to get my books home, but like not everyone in my school was able to do that. But my school did chosen work because like the schools found out at the same time as the students. Really, no one knew like exactly what's happening in terms of education.
We were just kind of stuck in the house. You could only really go 5 kilometers away. And like the only place I could go to that's 5 kilometers away from me is like one park. And it's like pretty small. So I had to kind of like to go out for my walk, I had to go there. But it was just it just wasn't great for like anyone's mental health. You were just either stuck in the house or walking around like your local area, and everybody was out doing the same thing. It was just a very like difficult time mentally, I think, for a lot of
like if you're on the news you'd see like, oh, young people like having raves and being reckless because that's what young people do, and like risking people's safety and their lives and stuff like that. But I really felt like it was wrong time, wrong place. I think the majority of young people are trying to stick with the guidelines. Like I think that society should give young people the benefit of the doubt. Like most teenagers are really sensible and would have probably stayed home. I just feel like there was no communication with the young people. Like I'm sure you can see the whole things with like the pubs, the big sectors. If they're angry about something, at least they can like, go and strike and make some like economic action to like get their point across so they can like lobby like the government to do something about it. But like with students, that's not really a thing. Do you know what I mean?
A lot of the restrictions that are now being made or have been made also, do you think they consider young people, even when you think about it, the idea of a frontline worker in Ireland, they generally class nurses and doctors, let's say, as frontline workers. But with an awful lot of students that I know, they work in supermarkets and they also work in pharmacies and things like that. So they too are frontline workers because they're working basically 12-hour shifts in Little Aldi or wherever. Do you think young people are being considered in the restrictions at the moment?
I don't really think that they are. I think like I have a lot of friends who are actually like frontline workers and they're working in shops, like, and even when it was like level 4 or 5, like when everything else was closed down, they were still working in supermarkets and stuff. So it's like they're not really taking young people into account, but the rules aren't really taking any particular demographic into account.
And if Naya, how do you think young people are being taken into account with certain restrictions?
So like I think it's important to get their perspective, because if you don't talk to the people that you're giving the guidelines about how it's implementable, it's not going to work.
We're still kind of going through the pandemic, and as you've said now, where students are hitting milestones and young people are hitting milestones, and they're hitting them alone, whereas beforehand they would have been hitting them with their friends or their communities. I'll start with Anaya. Maybe I could ask you guys, what does freedom mean to you right now then at this moment? Because I know beforehand it was something different before you started Freiraum. After you finished your first year on Freiraum, it was something quite celebrating, something quite connected to Europe. And I would love to hear you give your answer. What does freedom mean to you right now?
So for me, freedom is looking to the future, because right now it's like I clearly, as a young person or as a person in life, don't feel free right now with the pandemic. But for instance, the stuff I've learned at Freiraum lets me know that in the future, there are definitely options out there. I just need to not lose sight of the goal. For instance, there's so many opportunities in Dublin, Ireland, in Europe, apprenticeships, like like available to young people all around Europe and stuff. And obviously now with the pandemic, everything's a bit up in the air, and we're not sure. But if young people like have that like knowledge that everything will pass, it'll be difficult. It might take a long time, but it will pass, and you just keep focused on the goal that everyone's looking at to make sure we stop the spread of COVID-19.
That's pretty dramatic, but like I do feel as though like the sense of freedom I did have has kind of been a little bit stripped of me. Like I'm feeling very like confused about, it's kind of, I did feel really assured before this pandemic about where I thought my future was going. And then as soon as the pandemic came, it kind of threw everything up in arms. I'm like, I just don't think that I'm just not feeling very free in like my ability to choose what to do, you know? Obviously, like it's kind of the government's COVID guidelines are really infringing on everybody. But I feel like it's particularly on young people because it's kind of, we're asking questions about what's going to happen for our future with no answers. And it's like they seem to have a plan for everything around COVID as best they can, obviously, as in they are taking it day by day. But with regard to like an approach, they just don't seem to have an approach for us as sixth years right now about what to do with the Leaving Cert. And it is quite mentally taxing, like to get up and go to school and go into an environment where you don't feel safe, whether it's because you are like someone who's high risk or if someone in your family is high risk.
As we talk about stresses under the pandemic, talk turns to questions about the Irish Leaving Cert. The Irish Leaving Cert is kind of on the same lines as the Abitur or the Baccalaureate or even the UK A-levels. Originally, the Irish government said it will go ahead. Then they said it will move to a predicted grade system where students would get a grade reflective of their work in school. And then there was a whole scandal also attached to the differences in the calculations of the grades. Another term used is DESH. DESH school is essentially a school that is in a low income area with traditionally high rates of crime and low rates of attendance, literacy and numeracy. Trinity Access Programs works with primarily DESH schools. Our discussion soon turns to the prospect of this year's Leaving Cert, the final set of exams to qualify students to attend third level. The previous year's students were able to qualify under a predicted grades model, as they were the first students to study under the COVID pandemic. The anxieties now turn to the current final year students who feel underprepared in their coursework and also in a precarious position for either more lockdowns, spikes in COVID-19, and the prospects of working remotely.
What worries me the most is like whether or not the Leaving Cert will go ahead or if it will go to predicted grades. Because my thing is that I do feel like if I'm focused on predicted grades and I'm focusing on trying to maintain like a good grade average in all my classes, if I get told then in say February, oh, the Leaving Cert will be going ahead, I do feel as though I'll probably be burnt out by then and I won't have any energy left in me to study. I just think it's not very fair of the government to kind of expect us to play our role in, you know, keeping the rest of the population safe, like people who are immunocompromised or the older people who are cocooning and stuff. But then also they won't kind of do anything for us to kind of like settle our ease. Like, what was that ease? That's what I mean when I say I think my freedom in that regard has kind of been stripped of me a bit, because I do feel like there's like nothing is in my control anymore. That's why I feel like I have lost a significant amount of freedom since the pandemic.
Yeah, and let's just say hypothetically, government ministers were listening to our podcast, and they were cluing in, and they were interested in ideas of freedom and Freiraum. What would you say? What could be done now to help young people feel like they're being considered and that their lives are being respected and honoured in these restrictions? What could the government do?
I know in schools with the whole like making sure the desks and tables are wiped off, like that takes into like 5 minutes of every single subject class every day. That's like a 40-minute class. That's like minus 5 minutes every single day. Like in terms of like the departments, are they gonna factor that in when they're like making the exams for next year? Stuff like that. Like that's really up in the air and they're not being very clear. And as a student, that's also very disheartening and very worrying.
But like I do think that if they want us to sit the traditional Leaving Cert in an exam hall, they're going to have to do something about like kind of giving us resources if it goes to a second lockdown, because it's not really good enough to have each school dictate the policy on online learning, because otherwise you have like private schools kind of getting a foot up on like regular schools, and then regular schools kind of getting a foot up on deaf schools and stuff. So it's just very unfair. It doesn't really feel like they're listening to any of our opinion.
Aisling, what do you think the possibilities of freedom are now for young people after the pandemic?
Well, to be honest, kind of the thoughts of what I'm going to do once the pandemic is over is kind of like the only thing that's keeping me motivated to actually like do my schoolwork and stuff. Is like I'm just thinking it's also quite a difficult thing to kind of even, I know this is like, it's hard to kind of picture a future without COVID, because you read articles online and stuff of people saying like a vaccine might not be found until like 2022. So then you start to think like, are we going to be living like this until 2022? You know, it can be very, I just feel like it can be very difficult to even picture any sort of future. And it's kind of, as well, I personally am just taking it day by day, because I do think, like, if you think about it, I had what I wanted to do planned out, and then a pandemic struck and everything changed. So it's like, if I'm thinking about what I want to do, like after the pandemic, anything can happen and that can change. So I really am kind of just taking it day by day. But I think what's the possibility of freedom once the pandemic is over for me is all I'm thinking about is kind of like seeing my friends again, like being able to like, I know this is so weird, but like being able to like go for lunch with my friends and like sit there and like laugh and not wear masks, and like being able to actually like see them speak and laugh and stuff. It's just a really weird kind of long-term goal. I'm kind of just coming to terms with the fact that like there's nothing really I can do about the pandemic, so I need to just kind of like that, take it day by day, and kind of just hope towards a future where I study abroad in Italy or I study abroad somewhere in Europe. And that's as specific as I'm gonna get in case anything changes.
So it's literally the same as Ashling's in the sense that like you just have, as a student, you just have, or as a young person, you just have specific goals every day. And like it's true, there's so many things before the pandemic that you kind of take for granted. Like you could travel, you could go out to a restaurant with friends, you could go, like just basic things that you take for granted. I see the joy in everyone's faces when we go out for mask breaks and you take off your mask and you just sigh of relief. Do you know what I mean? Because we weren't aware of how much freedom we actually had, basically. Because I'm sure there's some people in the world might not enjoy like the same freedoms that we might enjoy in terms of education, the access that we get to go to like libraries, different school events, stuff like that, competition, stuff like that. Maybe like other people might not get the same opportunities. It makes you think of that type of like scenario in our world anyway. But in terms of like the pandemic, I don't know, like when I think of my future and what the future holds, it's just to be hopeful. It's just, as Ashton said, take every day as it comes. What can I do today? And like what I do today, I have to do to the best of my ability, and hopefully that will stand to me whenever the powers that be make the decisions about what's going to happen for our year, our six years, leaving cert. We don't know. And I think I'm even grateful because the 6 years definitely had it way worse than us, because they had no idea that they were going to get predicted grade grading. At least we have the idea that maybe we could potentially have it. And I'm not saying it makes it any easier, but we have to kind of at least get to plan and prepare a bit first. And in terms of my future, since I want to go into like medicine or biomed and STEM subjects anyway, I know clear cut what I need to do. I need to make sure I focus on getting my grades up as high as possible. We're missing that social connection that we used to have, and that's obviously like very hard to lose. But I think we're going to come out of it stronger. We're going to not take those things for granted in the future. And knowing what we know now, we definitely have things in place in the future so that this never happens again. So it's kind of like we kind of know it's like most likely going to be a once-off thing. So just stick with it. Just be focused, be determined, and that's all I can say in terms of for the future.
Guys, you've been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for taking part in our Freiraum podcast. Stay safe.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Daniel. I enjoyed this.
This podcast is a part of a much wider festival, the Freiraum Pan-European Hybrid Festival, which hopes to discuss the state of freedom and the state of arts today. This is a festival that takes place both online and in person, so why not search freiraumfestival.eu to see what's happening in your local area. To play us out, we have Ifanaya and her artistic piece from the Freiraum I Am Europe Summer School, which was paired with Strasbourg Nancy. This performance exhibits the multitudes of identities today, as Ifanaya takes traditional Irish music, a well-known European national anthem, and a tune from her mother and father's homeland of Nigeria to explain who Ifanaya is.
I'm Irish. I am also Nigerian. Sweet mother, I don't forget you for the summer waves